Hi, everybody. Welcome back. This is episode 2. Today's topic is practice routines. My name is Adam, and this is Adam on Drums. I sat down a little while ago and I asked myself the question, what is the best practice routine? So I scoured the internet the best I could. I investigated through various social media platforms. I did research on a whole bunch of different articles. I read countless things here. And I think I've come up with a solution. And I came up with it in the strangest of places. It actually came to me from a friend of mine who I communicated with through a Facebook page. And that Facebook page was called First World Drummer Problems. So if you're not part of that Facebook page yet, give them a look up, see if you can get into that group. There's a lot of conversation in there happening about drumming and around practicing. So we're going to get to that in just a second. But first, let me apologize. It's been a long time since my first podcast. And one of the reasons, and you might be able to still hear it in my voice, is I've been fighting a pretty brutal cold for the past maybe 1.5 weeks. It just doesn't seem to go away. And my voice didn't seem anything appropriate to be recording during the heavy throes of that cold there. So I'm a little better. Still a little raspy. It's almost like a more masculine tone here, but all that aside, I am getting better, and I wanted to get this out to you as quick as I could, but it did give me a lot more time to do some more research. So without any further ado, let's start talking about practice routines. My first stop on my journey was talking to people on Instagram. There's a pretty good drum community out there. There's a lot of people using some really awesome hashtags and sort of connecting with each other through that. I use my own hashtag. If you are hearing this, feel free to add it to whatever you post related to drums and music, and that's hashtag Adam on Drums. But while I was out there, I asked people to either use that hashtag or just directly message me or tag me in their posts. But I asked people to post things about their practice routine, give me a video, or just write something up on your practice routine. And I got quite a few responses from that, and I'll share with you a couple of the better ones. And I will be paraphrasing. I didn't print them out and try to read them or anything. But one of the first ones was from this guy. His Instagram account, I guess I was going to say his name, but his Instagram account is BeatMick01. And he shared a video with me that was him practicing sort of a Mike Johnston style exercise, which was just focusing on sort of limb independence. So he's working on right and left hand. He was working on, feet, that kind of thing. And everything was doing something different. Super awesome exercise, super groovy. Now that sent me down this sort of rabbit hole into Mike Johnston lessons. And that guy is phenomenal. He's an excellent instructor. He's got a great personality. He makes you want to be his friend and like what he does. He's just, in my opinion, he's a really, really great instructor. Right? He's a great guy. And he's a fantastic drummer. And he's a really good teacher. So I started looking at some of his stuff. And he's got quite a bit of free content out there. And he also has some paid content as well. Sort of like a subscription style thing. And I'm sure if you were to follow that and follow that routine and the stuff he has to offer, you would be a phenomenal drummer by the end of it. It's not the type of thing I have time to commit to. If I didn't have a wife and kids and a full-time job, it's the type of thing that maybe I would look into investing into that. But just the amount of time I get to dedicate towards my drumming, it wouldn't really be worth the financial end for me. Not that it's a ridiculous amount, but whatever, I'm babbling about it. Through that chain of comments, actually, I got in touch with another drummer named Cody Spiker, and his Instagram account is the Cody Spiker. And he started talking about practicing sort of right foot and left foot. So using your double bass drum pedal, learning a groove on your right foot, and then switching over to your left foot and trying to play the same groove. This was super awesome because this really resonated with me. This is something I did when I was younger. When I was maybe 12 or 13, my dad had bought me a higher level drum kit. I had a very entry level drum kit at first. And then when it really looked like I was going to stick with drumming, my dad invested into a better quality drum kit. When that happened, I set up my new drum kit right-handed, and I set up my old drum kit left-handed, and it took up all of my bedroom, but it looked really kind of cool in my opinion. And I would practice both ways. I would try to learn something right-handed, and then I'd spend some time trying to learn it left-handed. And I thought it was a really good exercise. I saw a lot of value in that. And in my mind, it kept my left and right hand pretty equal while I was younger and still doing that. Another thing that Cody Spiker had brought up during these conversations was that he uses old drum heads and he'll sort of cut out the skin, leaving the metal ring behind. And he'll use that drum head and maybe cut a couple inch diameter circle out of the middle and place it on top of his toms or whatever drums he's using to sort of give himself a target. So if he can go around his kit and keep his drumstick sort of in that target, it sort of helped with his accuracy. And if you can do that sort of slowly, later on when you build up speed, you'll get to the point where you can sort of go around your drum kit a lot quicker. I mean, there's plenty of ways to do this. Even if you had older, sort of like a coated head, you could easily make markings on them with a pen or a marker. Some people play like the Remo black dots and things like that. Aquarian makes a drum head that has a white dot in the center as well. So you could do that with a variety of different sort of technologies here, but that idea of increasing your accuracy, I thought had a lot of value to it. And I really appreciate the fact that Cody brought that up and had that be part of the conversation. I had a lot of people bring up the fact that they just practice their rudiments on a pad, and that's really what their practice routine consists of, for a variety of reasons, I guess. Some were the fact that they have families at home, like myself, and to get down, and like for me, my drums are located downstairs, so to get downstairs and play loud drums all the time is just not practical. And some people, they keep their drum kits at their, guitarist's house for their band, and they go to band practice every Tuesday. So they don't have regular access to their drums. So they'd practice on a drum pad or a pillow or a mouse pad or whatever you might have that can get you get your arms moving, get your wrists moving. So I thought that was pretty valid to bring that up. The idea that just practicing something, or at least, rudiments anyway, to get your arms where they need to be, is extremely valuable, and you shouldn't really go too long without practicing because your muscles are going to sort of get used to not playing. And also, there was a huge group of people that voiced to me that they don't really have a routine. They don't have any set structure to their practicing. They might say, hey, I have a half hour, let's just go jam out. And they'll go to their drums, and they'll play whatever comes to their head for that particular half hour. They'll feel great about it, and they'll go on with the rest of their day. Perfectly fine. That's great. If that's exactly what you want to do, then you should absolutely go ahead and do that. That ultimately is what I have been doing for probably the past 5 years or so, related to drums. So my intention now is to sort of be more focused and intentional to improve my drumming. And one of the reasons I'm choosing to do that is I feel I'm on a bit of a plateau. I climbed up to this certain point, and now I'm kind of there, and I'm not really getting any better. I'm just kind of practicing what I know, and I'm kind of staying there. But I'd love to sort of elevate myself to the next level. And that was sort of the start of this journey in the first place. For me, sort of a selfish reason, I just want to learn how to get myself better. But also, as part of the podcast and all that other stuff, I'd love to share any information I find along the way with you. So after coming across all these responses to my question that I was sort of expecting, to be honest, I was expecting a lot of results about practicing rudiments on a pad. I was expecting a lot of people to tell me that they don't actually have a practice routine and that they just kind of, go after whatever they're currently feeling at that moment. I also expected a lot of people to tell me that they play with a band, so they just kind of practice the songs that they need to know for that particular band. Those are sort of my expectations. I did get one response that I thought was really awesome and really valid and was totally blown away as soon as I read it. And I had one of those moments where I'm like, why the hell didn't I think about that? Right. A little background too, if you don't know, I am a school teacher. That's my job. I went to college to learn how to teach people and to educate people. And this fits in so well with how the human brain actually digests information and learns things that I was blown away that I didn't come up with something similar to this on my own. So this was from a guy, his name was Rob Harwood, and it was through a Facebook group called The First World Drummer Problems. So I posted this question up on that group and was fielding a whole bunch of different responses. So what Rob said he does is that he takes a piece of paper and he writes down 3 things that he wants to work on. After each thing, he'll put up 30 check boxes. And when he gets time to practice, he'll practice one of those 3 things. And if he practices that thing that day, he puts a check in the box. And he's sort of very loose with it. So if he's got 10 minutes to practice and he wants to spend all 10 minutes on one thing, he'll put a check mark next to that one thing. If in that time he practices 2 things, he'll put a check mark next to each of those. And when he goes through and checks off all 3 things 30 times, then he just reevaluates and he makes a new list. And he said he's very free to put things back on the list that he'd been practicing that previous cycle, or he's very free to just, put all of that stuff aside and try 3 brand new things. I thought it was fantastic. It's one of those things where there's no pressure. There's less pressure, I guess. And it kind of just keeps you focused a little bit. So for me, I was practicing with very little focus, and a routine like this would really allow me to add some element of focus, and at the same time not be too hard on myself. And one of the things that Rob brought up in the conversation was that he sort of tried all these other routines before, where you start with warming up with paradiddles and then you jump into something else and you work on sort of, limb independence exercises and all that other stuff. And he said in trying that, he might stick with it for a week and eventually he would lose interest and sort of just fall away from it and not do it anymore. And that idea resonated with me huge. That's exactly what happens when I try some of these more elaborate routines. It just doesn't quite stick, and I just can't quite hang with it for more than a week or something. It's very much like the idea of extreme dieting versus a lifestyle change, right? People are always trying to lose weight, and New Year's rolls around, and then they cut out carbs and they cut out alcohol and they don't drink milk anymore, and they promise themselves they're going to jog every single day. And by the second week of January, they're exhausted and they give up. And the issue is they become disheartened and they sort of feel like they're not good at that because they sort of bit off a little more than they could chew. So that was one of the parts that was appealing about this suggestion from Rob, is that it's manageable, right? It's something that you can do, and it's something that has room for change. If it was a really hard cycle, you might want to loosen up next time, right? And you don't have to be too hard. So you kind of you lose that disheartened feeling because you kind of are in control of how successful you feel along the way, right? And I thought that was just absolutely brilliant. So at the beginning of the podcast, I told you the question was, what is the best practice routine? And I think I know the answer. And the best practice routine ultimately is the one you're going to stick with, right? That's the answer to the question. The practice routine that you can stick with is the one that is the best. So after my 2 weeks of research here, my new practice routine is very similar to what Rob was talking about. I chose 3 activities for myself. One of them is sort of just drumming on a pad. I can do this upstairs. I can do this after the kids go to bed. Me and my wife are watching TV. I can drum away on a pad or a pillow or something like that. And I can get sort of those rudiments down and out of the way. So I made a checklist like Rob suggested, and that is one of the items that I have 30 boxes after. So far I've done that 3 or 4 times, and I'm starting to feel like I'm better, right? I'm starting to feel a difference in some of those rudiments. And I'm impressed by that. I like that I'm seeing those results relatively quickly. The other 2 things that I've added to my routine is a technique to keep my right foot up to speed. that's something that I like working on, and I think it's fun and I think it's neat. And there's a couple practice routines that I like to do there, so I just added that into the mix. And the other one I added is an activity or an exercise that really strengthens my left hand on the snare drum. When I was younger, my left hand had a lot more speed to it, and I could do a lot more sort of ghost noting and little fancy dancing around on the drum head that has sort of slipped away over the years. So I'm looking to bring that back a little bit. So I have that activity in there too, where I warm up on that left hand a little more. So that's how I've sort of adjusted my practice routine since going on this quest, I guess, to find ways of improving my practice routine. I still do a little bit of that jamming out. I still just kind of sit down and play what rhythms are hitting my head at any given time. There are a variety of other methods you can use to sort of diversify your playing or to trigger yourself to play something different that are different than practice routines. So I'm going to talk about those here sort of towards the end of the podcast. And my favorite one is to change up my drum kit. So I currently have 2 different snare drums that I go between. One of them has a much higher pitched tone. It's more of like in my opinion, like a jazzy sort of funky high pitched tone snare drum. It's a 13 by 5 snare drum, and I tune it up kind of tight, and it's got a nice crack to it. The other snare drum I use is the one that came with my kit, and that's a 14 by 7, and I have it tuned sort of to a medium-low tuning, so it's a very sort of rock and roll style snare drum tone. So when I'm playing, if I put on that smaller snare drum, I just notice myself playing more of like a funk beat. And if I put on that bigger snare drum, I notice myself playing more of a rock and roll beat. So sometimes I'll switch between the two if I find myself getting into a rut. I can also change around my cymbals quite a bit. My cymbals are very sort of useful in different capacities. So I have a big old 24-inch ride cymbal, which I just absolutely love. But I also have an 18 and a 20-inch. And these are all the Peisty giant beat cymbals. And I can ride the 18, and I can ride the 20, and I can ride the 24. So sometimes I'll switch those up just to get different sounds, and it kind of makes you respond differently to the drum kit. Changing your heads on your drums will give them different tones and different feels, and you'll play differently just with those different sounds coming out, as well as pulling a tom off or putting a tom in a different spot and changing that around. Right now, and for the past maybe month or so, I had my kit set up with a snare and a 16-inch floor tom. That's kind of it. In the past, I've had a 13-inch rack tom on my kit as well, and an 18-inch floor tom, but now I just kind of have it set up with the floor tom and the snare drum. In the past, I've actually taken my 18-inch floor tom and turned it into a bass drum and used that. And I thought that was a great way to sort of try different things. It gave me a completely different feeling. I felt like I was behind a different kit, and I just started to play a little differently. Things I could play easier on that setup than I could on my other setup, and it just got me thinking down different roads. So if you do find yourself in a rut, these are some of the strategies. Just try to change things up, right? Try to play either a different style of music if you want to. You could change left hand and right hand, right? Play with sort of an open sticking, so your left hand's on your hi-hat if you're right-handed instead of your right hand. Play like we said before. Cody on Instagram informed me that he plays sometimes with his left foot instead of his right, using his double bass drum pedal. Do things like that. Try to mix it up. Always try something new. You should always be pushing that sort of what we call the growth edge, right? You're going to get to the point where you're sort of right at the edge of your comfort zone, and that's where things are starting to fall apart. So if you can play there all the time, eventually that uncomfortable spot will become comfortable, and you've just expanded your growth edge, right? You keep playing in the uncomfortable. So when you get comfortable here, you move out a little further, and then that'll be uncomfortable at first, and when that gets comfortable, move out a little further and a little further and a little further, and ultimately that should get you where you want to be. So for me right now, my growth edge is really working on my snare hand and trying to improve some of my rudiments. I'm going to work on that. Right now it's still a little uncomfortable. I'm not at the speed I want to be at. Get that where I want it. I'm going to push my growth edge out a little further and try some other stuff. Well, that's all the time I have here today, folks. Thank you for listening. Please look out for my next podcast. It's due out in about a week. The title of that is going to be Play What You Got. So that's really going to be focused on minimalist recording. This all sort of stemming from a philosophy I was exposed to from an article I read by Gabriel Roth. So if you're familiar with him and his work, please definitely tune in. I'll be talking about that and some of my experiences with that. And lastly, folks, please remember to keep in touch through social media. You can find me on Instagram at AdamOnDrums, and feel free to use the hashtag AdamOnDrums. I also have a YouTube channel and a Facebook page dedicated to this podcast.